We found a way to prevent pitching injuries, or did we? There's a subtle league trend that appeared this year, and the hopes are that its broader application is to quell the perennial issues the league has had with keeping pitchers healthy. Arm angle is a metric that Baseball Savant released last year. We have 5 years of public information on the metric, and this season marks the league's lowest average arm angle in that 5-year span. So let's dig into two big questions around this topic. Why are arm angles lower? And is it actually going to help pitchers stay healthy? I was actually pulled onto MLB Now to talk about this topic with Brian Kenny, but I'll admit, at that point, I was pretty fresh into my reporting on this, and I've learned a lot since. It starts with what arm angle is in the first place. Baseball Savant is measuring arm angle as a literal line from ball release back to the shoulder and the resulting angle between that line and a horizontal line. Among MLB arms this season, here was some of the largest drops in arm angle. Max Meyer, Cole Reagans, Garrett Crochet, Logan Gilbert, all those guys stand out. Paul Skeens is often mentioned in this discussion, but his decrease was smaller, just 3 degrees. And after talking to a few different people in baseball, admittedly not anybody with the Pirates or Skeens himself, it seems like this was actually connected to somewhat of a stride direction change. He's a bit more open at foot plant, which could have some impact on his trunk tilt. When I brought this up to some folks in major league organizations, an immediate response I got that made me perk up was something along the lines of, that kind of arm angle is only so valuable. The public arm angle measurement that you could look up on Savant in a few clicks is somewhat incomplete. This metric is heavily tied to a pitcher's torso bend, or tilt into release, which is influenced partially by how their pelvis rotates through its full range of mobility in the throw. We're almost never looking at a literal arm angle change independent of anything else, so the arm is never coming up or down without something else happening in the body. What we often see is guys are staying more stacked in their delivery, which is this concept that your shoulder plane and your hip plane are more in line such that you can conserve momentum through the throw, and when that happens, perhaps what we see is arm angles drop. I obtained this graphic from 2023 showing all the lateral trunk tilts in MLB at ball release. As you drift away from the highest concentration of pitchers around here, you start to get into more uncommon levels of tilt, which could be limiting mechanically. Kevin Gossman, for example, is over here, and Tyler Glasnow is over here, both within a reasonable amount of tilt relative to the average, and both with pretty different levels of injury history. The metaphor given to me that I love and will steal relates to a tree and its branches. The angle of the tree is the primary attribute, which is what we're looking at with this tilt graphic. The branch or the arm angle is more of a secondary attribute. One individual in a major league org told me that when looking at arm angle or slot, they're looking at more of a suite of variables, including torso side bend at ball release, kind of what we were just talking about in terms of tilt. They're also looking at humerus relative to forearm at ball release. Now we're getting super nerdy here, I know, but this is the relationship between this bone and your forearm. Look at Paul Skeens versus Max Kranick and you'll understand how the relationship between these 2 points of the arm can vary. And the last variable, which doesn't really complete the organization's suite that they look at but is included in it, has to do with elbow extension into ball release, which gets into how the arm is acting in those final moments before the ball rolls off your fingertips. The primary takeaway here is that when we distill something as complex as the throw down to an individual variable like arm angle, what's happening is that we're missing a lot here. This topic is very complex. Usually has to do with things that are more proximal to the body, so proximal to the spine. Those things like the pelvis and the torso are changing, which is causing the extremities to change. So therein lies like the root of the tree and the branches that we're talking about. And that's what's more important. And it's complex, but no matter what way you slice it, I got some really good answers as to why we're seeing this. Why are we seeing an actual drop, even if it's only 1 degree, in MLB pitchers' arm angles year over year? The leading theory that makes sense to me is that the league is chasing cutters, sinkers, sweepers, diversity of mix, more so than we have in the past. And what we often see is that lower slots allow for greater arsenal possibilities. There's more room for seam effects to take place and create shapes in different parts of a pitch plot that are somewhat inaccessible with higher slots. Most of the people I talked to for this video landed on some version of that as the macro reason for slots being down. The other why, that's a much more impactful one, is the elephant in the room: injuries. I saw a tweet from David Girth using Driveline Baseball's Open Biomechanics database showing that torque, or a measurement of stress on an arm, increases from 25 degrees arm angle to 40 degrees arm angle and then kind of tapers off. So the league average here is right around that 40 degree mark. Think of Bowden Francis or Porter Hodge, who are right around that average. Eno Saris of The Athletic also shared a pair of studies, one of which showed increases in elbow torque for every 10-degree arm angle increase, and another study which highlighted the kinematic differences between low torque and high torque groups. Yes, nerdy stuff, I know, but they essentially said, yes, we see higher torque guys with different tendencies in other parts of their body compared to low torque guys. When I presented this idea that torque increases from a below average arm angle up to an average arm angle to a source in a major league organization, he said, well, yeah, because velocity increases as you kick up slot, and velocity generally leads to more torque. There was also a general consensus in people I talked to that there's a tendency for pitchers who throw from a higher slot to rotate less on plane. This on plane idea is what I kind of alluded to earlier. If you draw a line through the shoulders and the hips, you generally want these planes to sync up directionally to be pushing in the same direction, and when they unsync is when things get a bit hairy. There was also a consensus that you could cheat vertical break and velocity through this concept called late side bend. The idea that kicking up your slot slightly towards release, cueing your central nervous system to throw hard and resulting in that can make you look better in stuff models. Now, maybe that's not sustainable long term, but what it made me think of was more of a cost benefit analysis. If we have a pitcher sitting with an average arm angle and he looks a lot better from a marginally higher slot, whether it be because of velocity or vertical break, are we comfortable accepting that risk in that individual pitcher and sacrificing maybe some of his longevity? That has to do with perhaps who we have to backfill, the importance of success right now at the major league level, how much we have invested in that individual player. You have a lot of conflating variables here, but I don't think it's as simple as we want to keep this guy healthy long term. I think the goal of a lot of major league organizations is to succeed, and I think a lot of the time that counteracts perhaps with health. The massive issue here, pervasive through all of these studies, is that torque, or the variable that compounds to create our stress metric, is very individualistic. Forearm length and width, the length and density of your humerus, all these other subtle things will change torque regardless of your slot. You could have two pitchers that look almost nearly identical, but because of something internally in their bodies, are creating different torques. This is getting super into the weeds, but it brought me back to this reliever conversion video I did from the offseason, and probably one of my favorite graphs that starts to broach this velocity-torque relationship. This is showing that two pitchers can throw at the same velocity and have dramatically different torque indicators on their arm. And if we go even deeper within that pitcher's individual torque number, we want to know how that torque is being created. How are they creating their arm speed? This is all a really unfortunate way to say we just don't know what's optimal for a given pitcher without knowledge of all of these variables I mentioned earlier and some of these biometric ones like bone density that I don't think a lot of major league teams even consider or utilize. So I don't think we can really make broad strokes that slots down across the league equal good. Maybe slots down are good for some pitchers because you're chasing better shapes, but I don't think this is going to show signal on the league level that lower slots is leading to more health, especially when we consider that velocity is still one of the kings. If for some reason the league does embrace this and slots drop and we don't see a dramatic increase in health, what I think we'll see is that everyone chases higher slots again. Those become less common of looks and therefore have a subtle competitive advantage relative to other pitchers. My ultimate takeaway here is that three things can be true. Number one, we're seeing lower slots because teams are chasing diversity of mix, sinkers, cutters, sweepers, etc. And there's more access to different parts of a pitch plot from lower. There's more access to things like seam effects. Number two, we're getting better from an understanding of mechanics standpoint. These concepts of planes of rotation, momentum, stacking them together, making things better, postural changes to get guys into what we think are healthier mechanics. But number three, I don't necessarily know if that optimization of mechanics will lead to long-term health, partially because of how much velocity is being chased and how important that is. That is the element in this entire thing that I had a really hard time separating out. Velocity will always be there. I think it will always be good, and as a result of that, I don't necessarily know if you could prevent injuries. You just marginally mitigate them such that they're not as disastrous and plentiful as we've seen over the last couple years. As to what will actually change injury rates depends on who you talk to. I like the idea of using pulse in non-game throws, tracking those, building them into throwing programs, and really educating that, maybe making it a Major League Baseball standard, something along those lines. Other people, especially on the medical side and on strength and conditioning teams, really wanted an understanding of individual players' tissue density and construction. I'm not even sure what the actual correct terms are there, but they basically wanted a better understanding of like the biomarkers of an individual and their ability to accept the stress that we're putting on them. I thought that was fascinating. As to whether players and agents specifically ever allow players to give that to teams, I highly doubt, but if you actually want to change injury rates, then maybe that's the way to go. It's just a deal that I don't think will ever happen. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a really complex one that took me a bit of time to construct and put together. And I intentionally didn't watch or consume almost any other content on this topic. I saw Trevor May did a video. I've seen some other stuff. I saw Eno Saris had a podcast with Trevor May about this. I didn't touch any of that. I wanted to come into this completely blind, form my own opinion. And I'm literally going to go jump over right now and watch these other videos and see what other people had to say. So I hope this video to some extent is distinct in ways from all these other ones already out there on this topic. And as always, thanks for watching.